So last week's news, we talked about the fact that Texas put the halt, or at least pumped the brakes on 1,800 data centers that apparently were submitting for permits to be constructed. And the main reason for that was basically Texas looked at that and went, well, wait a minute here. The most power we've ever had to provide at one time for all power plants combined for the entire state was between 85 and 90 gigawatts. The data centers were accumulating more than 474 gigawatts of power demand. So basically the state was like, whoa, wait a minute here, that is not possible, that is not sustainable, and we can't even begin to be able to power that. Well, the story is kind of evolving and it's expanding now to where more and more bipartisan decisions are being made across the country to completely pump the brakes on AI data center construction. So this is kind of great news. This is sort of, well, it's great news for many reasons. Environmental, pollution-wise, both noise and physical pollution into the air and water supplies. And then obviously it means that maybe we can see some reality come back when it comes to the realistic spending and the circle jerk of money that's taking place in AI. So let's talk a little bit about this. This is kind of breaking right now, and I figured it deserved its own standalone piece because we all keep waiting for the signs that the bubble is gonna pop. And right now, every time there's been a whole the bubble's gonna pop, it hasn't really popped, it just kept growing. So now let's see if this is finally what it's gonna take. If you're serious about your aim, your mouse actually matters more than people think. And this is Be Quiet's new Dark Perk gaming mouse. Now what I like is that they don't do the usual one shape fits nobody approach. You've got two options, the Sim, which is a classical symmetrical design, and the Ergo, if you want something that actually fits your hand for longer sessions. It's also super lightweight, which makes a bigger difference than people realize, and less fatigue, easier micro adjustments, and just better overall control. And inside you get the PixArt PAW 3950 sensor, up to 32,000 DPI, and 8,000 hertz polling. So yeah, this is top tier tracking and no weird acceleration, no spin outs, and just exactly what you expect your mouse to do. And the clicks feel really nice too. These are optical Omron switches, so they're fast, consistent, and a little softer than the typical click, which is great for long sessions. And then the part that people overlook, it's 100% PTFE skates with rounded edges, which means this thing glides smooth, predictable, and with no drag. Oh, and with up to 110 hours of battery life, so you're not constantly plugging it in. So if you're trying to get every little advantage you can in competitive gaming, this is one of those upgrades you'll actually notice. So check out the Be Quiet Dark Perk mouse in the link in the description below. Okay, so this is coming to us via MSN, which is also syndicating a Tom's Hardware article, so we'll put a link to the original article down below. So right now, this article says that more than 500 restrictions and bans on new data center developments are now in place across the US. So this is separate from the Texas ban. Now, this doesn't necessarily talk about so Texas obviously had 1,800 according to the figure that we saw. Now this is saying 500 across the US. This is basically, as far as I can tell, looking at large format data center, right? Data center can be my little cubby next door is technically a data center because of the fact that it supplies data to us. So obviously we're talking about huge scale stuff here. Now here's why this is news. In June, that number was only at 300. Now in July, that number is 500, and we are now almost halfway through August. So hopefully what we're seeing now is that this is gonna start accelerating, maybe as fast as AI accelerated in disrupting the world and the economy. Now maybe we'll see it start to disrupt AI a little bit because the amount of spending and the amount of scaling, or at least attempted scale, has just been absolutely unrealistic and unsustainable. And that's where the idea of a bubble comes in. When something is unsustainable and it finally has to stop, the bubble's gonna pop. And so that's what we're kind of thinking might be potentially happening here. Now, the best part about this is not politically divided. Almost every issue in the world, regardless of what country you live in, is going to have divided issues. However, this appears to be a united front amongst Republicans and Democrats here in the US, which is great because of the fact that that means that we might be able to actually get somewhere with this when it comes to the amount of pushback that we're getting. So let's compare the difference between the 1,800 we talked about in Texas and the 500 that we're talking about in this article. 1,800 was the amount of submitted permit applications to build data centers of all different sizes. This 500 we're discussing now were straight up banned. These are not allowed to move forward. These are no permits being issued. Do not pass go. Do not collect your 200 fake dollars. So that's good news because that's what we need. We need these AI data center build outs right now, which are cash grabbing the shit out of everything to have a small dose of reality. Now, the cool part about this, and I'll be cynical on part of this too, is this is a bipartisan effort. This is Democrat and Republican driven legislatures or in Senate seats and all these different politicians that are involved in all the different levels of the bureaucracy that takes place in building these data centers are starting to unite in the agreement that this needs to be halted, that this is unsustainable power delivery demand. This is unsustainability when it comes to environmental impact. But more importantly, more than 70% of Americans oppose data centers being built. That's where the cynical comes in for me. That is all they're doing, as far as I'm concerned, is protecting their seats. They're not working for the people. They're not really listening to the people. They just know now, okay, 70% is pretty overwhelming, and that includes both sides of the partisan fence. So I feel like this is just a move for them to look like they're working for the people, but I don't believe that they are. And that's my personal opinion. Many of you may disagree. That's perfectly fine. It's just that's my cynical belief in this. I think they're just protecting their seats. But hey, if protecting their seats mean we can also protect the entire industry, the entire world in this aspect when it comes to out of control costs, then I'm fine with that. Absolutely, do it. But the crazy part is that 500 ban is up from 300 in June. So in June, 300 large-scale data centers had been banned and non-issued permits. In July, that number is 500. Can't wait to see what August ends up being, because it really sounds like we're accelerating the rate now at which some brain cells are starting to reactivate in these politicians that are in charge of either approving or denying these things. And this is all level of government, by the way, all the way down to local city municipalities are involved in all of this, obviously. Now, the biggest complaints aren't necessarily about AI. Most people, I think, there's such a huge spectrum of people's fears regarding AI, to the most extreme believing it's the extinction of humankind, to the most simple being I'm just tired of being, seeing AI everywhere in terms of advertisements and maybe some advertising slop on a billboard or something like that, where they may feel like it only partially affects their life in some way. It's affecting everybody in big ways, more so than people even realize. But the main pushback that people have from this is, like I already said, the electrical demand, which means now to meet the demand, you've got to more quickly spin up either coal factories, nuclear power plants potentially, because unfortunately the cost and the red tape involved of also putting up clean energy solutions like hydro dams, which that's a whole, out here in my area, what hydro dams? I mean, Hoover Dam's been pretty much completely obsolete now forever because of the reduction in the Lake Mead's water line. So half those turbines don't even turn anymore. Anyway, wind farms, solar farms, so many of these clean air projects have actually gone defunct. Like if you guys have ever flown near Las Vegas or driven into Las Vegas, you'd see all those mirrors out in the middle of the desert, where all of those mirrors were designed to do is refocus sunlight at the top of those three towers, which would then heat oil, which would then start to boil and create steam, which would turn a steam turbine, which would turn a generator. Even that's offline now. That's not working anymore at all. It's impossible to provide this level of electricity. Not only that, it's the impact the electricity has on everyone in the area. So for instance, politicians are starting to realize, including public utilities commissions now, are realizing these data centers are it is improportionate, the level of impact they're having on the power delivery system versus what regular citizens and businesses are. So there was also an disproportionate level of increase in cost to everybody when nobody other than these data centers were responsible for the immediate increase in demand and increase in price. So now they're starting to push back on that, saying, well, wait a minute, why should regular people start to foot the bill for this energy production when 90% of the energy being demanded is coming from these data centers? So that's huge to see. Obviously, there's the water consumption and water contamination pushback, especially since these data centers are always popping up near bodies of water or rivers or streams because they want to use naturally cooled water to also cool their data centers, which means they're pumping all of that contaminant and ions and metals that it's picked up along the way back into the water supply. So obviously, nobody wants that. Let's also talk about the noise. The amount of sound that comes out of these data centers is kind of crazy. They sound almost like a banshee scream sometimes. They all kind of sound a little different depending on the equipment that's in there.
High 58s, 59s to 60s.
Plenty of people have had data centers pop up within a half mile of their home, which has me questioning how zoning even allowed that to begin with, which means, once again, these politicians pushed it through. I also would love to see a list of the politicians that have approved all the current data centers. And I'm really curious now to what their voting habits look like. Were they all for it and now they're all against it because the people are getting mad? And there's your proof right there that it's all about protecting their seat. But any politician that's already approved these large form data centers to go anywhere near a residential zone, as far as I'm concerned, should be voted or kicked out immediately. That's my personal opinion on that. And then obviously the strain on local infrastructure and public services, not just power and water, but just overall the strain that it can have potentially on road systems. Many of these data centers are extremely large and have many people that are coming in to and from working there. Believe it or not, these large data centers are so heavily automated, they don't tend to generate a lot of local jobs. So they're not even stimulating the economy in that aspect. In fact, we know these AI data centers are going online and stealing jobs in many, many industries. So obviously there's a huge pushback on that. But Texas kind of became like the battleground with all of this. But Governor Greg Abbott recently imposed a moratorium on data center approvals while companies seeking connection to the Texas power grid are audited. It's significant because Texas has become one of the major destinations for enormous AI infrastructure and projects. You know why? Texas is big. Texas is flat. Texas has a lot of area that is not developed. So that's why they're looking at Texas. But the problem is, even if you pop up these data centers in non-developed areas, you still got to get the utilities there, and that puts a huge strain on the infrastructure, obviously. Now, at the same time, Amazon wants to build its own enormous power source in Texas. So this is the other half of the equation, right? So what some of these legislatures are proposing, if you want to build your big-ass data center, also provide your own big-ass power plant, which seems reasonable. Until we talk about earlier now with the dirty energy consumption, the dirty energy production causing more local environmental pollution. So now you have a compounded pollution issue between the data center itself and the power station, which would be theoretically powering that data center, since it will almost always be coal in our current environment. It's not going to be nuclear. Nuclear power plants are always near the ocean for a reason. There's a reason why you're not going to necessarily see that right there in the middle of Texas. Now, of course, there are inland power plants that are nuclear. I mean, Florida has some up by Orlando. There are inland nuclear power plants, but also those are also a pretty big endeavor to build because of the fact that the natural cooling that you get from the ocean, helps with keeping the reactors cool. Texas is also a very hot climate. So there's a lot of things to consider with that. So you can expect coal to be the way that they're going to do this. Now, Amazon's pursuing a gas power plant in, Pecos County to supply a nearby data center. Now, this illustrates where things might be headed, like I said, regarding building your own power plants to supply your own power to your own data center, which is cool. It means you don't got to sell that power back to the grid. But as far as I'm concerned, you shouldn't be able to offset it with the grid either. You have to be 100% self-sustainable when it comes to that power plant. Now, here's the thing regarding that Amazon power plant, that gas-powered plant. It is anticipated to be the single largest pollution-generating infrastructure in the entire United States, as proposed. Now you can see the compounding problem here, which it's not just about build your own power plant, sweet. We all know power plants create pollution themselves, right? It also goes back to like the whole EV debate. And yeah, you may have moved the emissions out of the tailpipe, but you just moved it more to the power production side and the battery production side. So you're sort of just whack-a-moling basically where the production or the environmental impact is going to be. This is no different. In fact, this would scale impact on the environment massively. So these are the things that the legislators are obviously having to think about and discuss as they move forward here. I've seen some proposals that basically said if you require more than 50 megawatts for your data center, then you have to provide your own power. Now, it's funny, 50 megawatts doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot. But if you think about the fact that we're already talking about 500 were banned, 1,800 were requesting permits in the state of Texas, you can see just how fast 50 megawatts stacked on top of each other hundreds of times turns into those crazy gigawatt figures we already talked about. So the South is basically where it's seeing the most impact on this, though, because, again, the South has the space, the open space. So the article also says that the Midwest and South account for more than 400 of the restrictions, and nearly 3/4 of the moratorium approved in July were in southern states. as Georgia and Florida kind of are heading the build-outs right now. Now, Florida's moving particularly fast. There are currently 23 active restrictions in Florida. 14 of those 23 were approved just in July. And another 15 restrictions are being considered. And New York is targeting the really big facilities. So Governor Kathy Hochul, I don't know how to say her name, signed an executive order pausing approval of data centers consuming more than 50 megawatts or more. So that's that figure we were just talking about right there. And that is not even just hey, if you have to provide your own power. It's if you require more than 50 megawatts, that's it. You're out. You can't build in New York. And that's a useful number to put in perspective, and that we're no longer talking about ordinary server rooms. These are essentially industrial scale power consumers. Even I'd love to see the power consumption comparison between like a normal data center, like providing websites, versus AI data centers and the amount of extra power that they consume. Anyway, other states are attacking the economics rather than outright banning them. So Massachusetts and Nebraska have halted tax breaks for data center developers. So that's the other half of the equation, right? Because what legislatures love to do is they want build in our state, because they want the revenue that it can generate, right? At the same time, they give these tax incentives to move to those states. So it's like, hey, I don't know what the exact figures are like, but it's basically we'll give you huge tax breaks and or tax exemption for a certain amount of time. Now they're not getting those tax breaks at all. So Colorado has also reportedly banned 19 data centers around Denver with additional restrictions elsewhere in the state. And water usage and environmental concerns are specifically cited in Colorado. And even individual projects are becoming political fights. There's a proposed 23-acre Nashville data center. 23 acres. This is crazy. This is going to look like Costco in freaking Idiocracy. I mean, welcome to data center. I love you. Anyway, it says a proposed 23-acre Nashville data center, potentially costing as much as $700 million, is facing resistance, and the proposed site is next to a zoo. A zoo. This whole thing is a zoo. Anyway, America is starting to wake up. By America, actually, let me back up. The citizens woke up a long time ago. The politicians are starting to wake up. And they're starting to wake up because they're realizing the amount of pushback that the people are giving regarding this. And it's like a perfect opportunity to remind these politicians who they work for. We know politicians work for corporations. That has absolutely been in the open because there's nothing anyone can do about it, because the same lawmakers that are working for the corporations are also responsible for holding themselves accountable. So that's like if I did something stupid and I'm like, guys, I'm investigating. You know, it just doesn't mean shit. It doesn't mean anything. So what does mean something, though, is just like when we say vote with your wallet, you know, you can also vote with your vote on this sort of thing. And these politicians, I think, are starting to become a little scared that the pushback that these AI data centers and then the environmental impact that they're having will start affecting their careers, when now pushing for these data centers to be built looks like a political career death sentence when it comes to the public. So this is the kind of thing we need to see. But now the politicians, and for whatever their motivation is, are starting to also push back on this. And considering some of the latest reports show that all of 2027's NAND HBM / capability, production capability for SK Hynix, Samsung, and Micron have been sold through, I'm hoping that this might lead to maybe some cancellations. Because right now, what we have are these major AI data center companies sitting on mountains of hardware that has not been deployed. And the best way to really stick it to those companies is make it impossible for them to deploy it. Then they're going to be sitting on a freaking mountain of worthless hardware as far as they're concerned. It'd be really interesting to see how this plays out. But the pushback and the resistance is accelerating. So hopefully this will continue to accelerate and we can see some true progress being made in halting, slowing down, and maybe potentially even reversing some of the overall impact that the physical side of AI is having on the world. I mean, obviously anything that has any sort of political chargedness to it, and the environment is unfortunately political, although it shouldn't be. There have been 37 arrests from heated AI and anti-AI protests that are starting to pop up. Now, 37 doesn't sound like a big number given the other protest movements that have been happening over the last 7 years or so, but it shows that things are starting to heat up and people are really starting to take it serious regarding pushing back against this. And it's just important. These politicians have to remember they work for us, not the other way around. So it'll really be interesting to see how this plays out, including, I live in California and it really sucks sometimes, but California governor's still pushing for that whole gas-powered car ban by 2035. That's 9 years away now. And still seems to think that that's going to be doable. But obviously, as AI data centers are popping up, we were all concerned of what EV charging was going to do to the infrastructure. That is minuscule versus what AI is doing to the infrastructure. So things are compounding quickly. Anyway, this is where I'm going to ask you guys to sign off, or not sign off, but basically sound off on what's your biggest take on all of this? Like, what are your true, raw feelings and opinions regarding all of this? And I don't even just mean like, it made PCs expensive. I mean, go think bigger than that. Think true impact. I'm curious as to how you guys feel about this. I can't remember the last time I saw anyone pro AI. So, all right, guys, thanks for watching. Just wanted to get this one out there. This is probably going to take place of news this week because Phil's actually taking some time off, which is rare. Apparently he has friends and he wants to go do shit or whatever. So, all right, guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.